Let's talk about transitions. Last year, we started the Neon SoC transition for Neon Compute, which we're still undergoing as you saw earlier today with Z1 Pro and Z1 Max. But today, we're announcing the biggest Neon transition yet. We're announcing the transition away from Android to our own Neon OS core for all of our platforms. This is the Nexus core, the same core as rubyOS, and it'll be the new core of all of our platforms in the future. This transition will redefine the mobile industry, and there's a lot of factors and questions you may have about this. So I'm going to break it down using the iconic 5Ws and 1H. Let's start with who will be affected. It'll be any user on our three Android-based platforms: dreamOS 27, timeOS 27, and mediaOS 27. Next, what will happen? Well, on your end, not much. We want this transition to be completely transparent for our users. We want your experience to feel the same as it does today, but with significantly better performance. And we'll get into why in a bit. Next, where will it occur? Well, it's designed from the ground up for Neon Silicon. For Neon Dream and Neon TV, it'll be designed for devices with P1 and D40 and later, respectively. And for Neon Watch, it'll be designed for Neon Watch models with WR2 and later. So this new core is designed to leave behind all of our legacy technologies, which will improve performance in huge new ways. Next, when will it happen? For you developers, it begins today. Our developer betas include both an Android and a Nexus core versions, which we will be beta testing throughout the summer. For our users, the transition will begin later this summer when we ship dreamOS 27, timeOS 27, and mediaOS 27 to the public. And this transition will take about 2 years, with it being completed in 2028. By then, we plan on phasing out the Android-based version of our platforms. But now we get into the biggest W question. Why are we doing this? To put it very plainly, Android has been holding us back. You probably know that half of our platforms are already based on this Nexus core. rubyOS, tabOS, and spatialOS are all based on the same Linux-derived Nexus core. But for dreamOS, timeOS, and mediaOS, they're all based on the latest version of Android. Our goal with this transition is for all Neon platforms to be based on the same Linux-based Nexus core. Now, you may remember that we have been through this before. In fact, pretty recently, 2 years ago with spatialOS 4, we transitioned away from an Android-based core to a rubyOS-based core. Now, since spatialOS is a more unique platform, this transition was very easy, and it allowed spatialOS to be deeper integrated into Neon platforms. And now that we've proven we can embark on an ambitious transition like this, we think it's time for this transition to be completed across our remaining Android-based platforms. There's another big factor in this transition, and that's release timing. Since our releases are based on Android, we've always been tied to Android release timing, which has backfired for us numerous times. With rubyOS Amaryllis, we intended to release it in August of 2023, as that was when the prior Android 13 was released. But Google pushed it to October 2023, which had us push rubyOS Amaryllis by a full 2 months. A year later, with Android 15, they released it in October 2024, but we weren't willing to wait that long. So we launched dreamOS 2 in September, running a beta version of Android 15 at launch. This even backfired for Google themselves, as they had to launch their Pixel 9 phones running Android 14 at the time. And last year with dreamOS 3 and Android 16, Google launched Android 16 earlier than ever in June of 2025, mere weeks after we released dreamOS 3 in beta. But because of this early release, it allowed some of our competitors like Samsung to beat us at releasing their Android 16 release. Now with dreamOS 27, we intend on shipping it with Android 17 at launch. But with our Nexus core, we don't need to worry about Google's timing with Android releases anymore. We can release these updates whenever we feel like it. But there's still some other factors, like foldables. You may remember the last time we launched a foldable device, the Neon Dream 5 Fold, almost exactly 2 years ago. Well, why the hiatus? Well, it's because we want to provide the optimal foldable experience, and Android does not allow us to achieve the experience we want. And there's desktop mode. You may remember when we introduced desktop mode in rubyOS Amaryllis, giving you a desktop-like experience when you connect your phone to a monitor, but we quietly removed it in dreamOS 3 last year. Why? Well, Android is holding back our vision for the full potential of this feature, as we want to deliver a full desktop-like experience when you connect your phone to a monitor. Now that dreamOS will be using the same core as tabOS, these two specific features are now possible. There are many other factors to why we're doing this transition that we'd be here all day, but to sum it all up, the Nexus core will allow our platforms to be even more unified and integrated than ever. So now, how are we going to do this? Luckily, the Nexus core is designed for this from the start, as we've built in a native Android 17 subsystem, which can run Android apps at full speed without modifications. In fact, you may notice that the Play Store is still going to remain the default app store on our platforms. But some apps may require translation, which is why we're introducing the Lumen translator. Lumen is a dynamic binary translator which automatically translates apps to run at full speed with zero developer modifications. But even after all this, some developer modification may still be required for some apps. So in that regard, we're introducing the Nexus Core Toolkit. This toolkit is compatible with Visual Studio and Android Studio, with more programs coming later down the road. And for most apps, you just need to download, import, and recompile, and the vast majority of developers can get their apps running in just days. The point of all of this is that nearly every single Android app will be compatible on day one, and that's thanks to the built-in Android 17 subsystem. And because of the subsystem, every Android API will also be compatible on day one. And the cases you need to switch between the cores, we've added a one-touch button to swap between the OS cores right in the Settings app, and it requires no restart. And in the rare cases of an issue, the OS core can switch automatically. Now, in dreamOS 27, the Android core will remain the default, but next year, the Nexus core will become the new default. And for timeOS and mediaOS, the Nexus core will become the default in early 2027 with updates to timeOS 27 and mediaOS 27. And with next year's major timeOS and mediaOS releases, the Android core will be phased out entirely, while it will still be maintained for dreamOS until 2028. So, all put together, this will be a huge transition that will be completely transparent to users. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for dreamOS, timeOS, and mediaOS, with Neon's biggest transition ever. Combined with the ongoing transition to Neon Z-Series chips for Neon Compute, this is such an exciting time for Neon, and we cannot wait for what's to come.